Well, welcome to episode 89 of Practical Show Tech here, where we're joined today with our couple of our friends from Riedel, Dave Caulwell and Matthew Dietzler. We're going to be talking today about frequency coordinating in the 1.9 spectrum. So before everybody starts just posting away, going, you can't do that, you can't do that, you can't do that. Okay. I will meet you halfway. You are correct. You technically can't control it the same way we do wireless microphones. And let's rename it for today. I'm going to call it frequency cooperating. All right. So you can take that play on words however you would like, either everybody playing nicely together, or as I kind of think about it, is that we're going to have multiple systems cooperating for many years to come. So a lot of our discussion today is going to be around how do we look at that spectrum? And I think there's some neat feature sets that we're going to be hearing about that are going to start raising the bar, if you will, on what we can expect from analyzation, and maybe even some hints of where the future is going to take us in terms of potentially having maybe control's not the right word, but maybe a little more influence on how our spectrum works. But before we head there, obviously we're joined by the two most famous people in intercom in the New York marketplace, Pete and Mac. It's good to see you guys. We're plugging these in now, huh? I guess in between our day jobs. It's a bit more work to find those, but it's an interesting time we're really in when it comes to RF in general. And Pete, do you have any thoughts about from your experiences? What you're feeling in this 1.9, this 2.4, and the unlicensed spectrum, if you will?
Well, I've always been amazed by the fact that 1.9 and even more 2.4 can cooperate with other things in the same band. Years ago, probably 2 or 3 years before COVID started, it's amazing how we set our clock by that fact. But I was on a show touring all through Europe with a 2.4 system. And usually when you're in a stadium with 20, 30,000 people, you can't use Wi-Fi, you can't use a telephone, but the data channel of the 2.4 is fine in that situation and just plods right straight through. And I know the NFL has always had an issue using 2-port intercom, because they say, oh, it's going to wreck our Wi-Fi. The Wi-Fi in the press box is going to be no good. And I think the reality is it might cause a slight slowing of the Wi-Fi just because of having a little bit of that data having to be retransmitted. But in reality, it cooperates really, really well. The only situation I've been in where I couldn't use it was when we're doing a show for a computer company like Cisco that says, no, nothing in the 2.4, it's ours only. So that's a political thing. We have to go that way. But I think the interesting thing is nobody has ever thought about it. Most users never think about coordinating their 1.9 systems. And this is going to be a really interesting look at what actually can be done and how you can use a system that we think has a limitation of X number of belt packs, but in reality, you can go above that X number. So that's my look on it. I'm looking forward to the whole presentation. Mac, you want to talk a little bit about Q&A?
Sure. In reference to the point you just made, though, doing these webinars, I'm learning a lot, and I'm looking forward to this as well. We're very Q&A focused here. So there's a Q&A tab on your control panel, and that's where you should ask your questions and ask whatever you need to know about. I mean, just ask your questions. We will try to get to every single question in the next 2 or so hours. We may not answer each question specifically or at the time that you ask it, but we will get to the answers to those questions before we're done. And try to be specific in your questions, because we may be answering it out of time with when it really came in the presentation. So it'll be clearer if the question is spelled out in detail.
Hey, Mac. So as we're, I think one of the interesting things to me, you were very busy during the pandemic, obviously in the studio doing a lot of things, remotely. You were at the forefront of the remote corporate broadcast. Just if it was being broadcast, you seemed to be there. What is your feeling on endpoints and the wireless versus the wired, and who expects to be on, in the intercom chain of communications?
I think these days, people who aren't sitting at a desk expect to be on a wireless con. It's not, wired belt packs just don't exist really in my world anymore. It's,
yeah,
it's wireless, or it's,
or panel.
Yeah, I mean, in the control room we have panels, but everybody else, cameramen are still plugged into their cameras as a rule, but not all of them. Some of our cameramen are wireless because they man more than one camera. And yeah, I mean, wireless has just completely taken over, and I'm glad. I mean,
there is a lot to be said, that it's made some things much easier. And one of the things I'd throw out to our audience today is, over the course of the session here, throw in the Q&A window, maybe what you're seeing as like a typical number on a show of wireless, or a ratio. Is it 2 to 1? Is it a 3 to 1? How many panels are you seeing versus packs? And obviously we know that that's going to vary a lot from industry segment, right? Broadcast to corporate to music, rock and roll. But we'd be interested to hear what all of you are experiencing out there, and the demand that you are or aren't seeing.
Yeah.
So
also mention about the handouts too.
Oh yeah, we've got some handouts in there. If you'll look at the control panel from GoToWebinar, you probably have a couple duplicates in there. I got a little carried away, I think. Well, I'll blame it on the software, but you should have, as Matthew said, everybody should start with a manual. Always want to have a copy of a manual on your computer somewhere, right? So you'll find the current Bolero manual in there. You'll see a white paper, which Matthew and Dave will be talking about, and then also a printout of the slideshow from today. So some lots of great information in there. So I am going to stop talking and throw this over to Dave and Matthew. Dave's the regional sales manager for the Eastern area of the United States, but we've seen you in a lot of different capacities over the past years, and it's awesome to the broadness of scale. And one of the things that really impressed me about Riedel is when we do these conversations with your team, there's always this 2-person team to really make sure that everything is covered from all aspects. So thanks for joining us today, guys. And I'm going to turn it over to you and let you guys take it from here.
Well, thank you, Kelly, and really thank you for having us. I think it's going to be an interesting couple hours here. So, Bolero has quickly become the go-to wireless intercom for many groups, supporting every kind of event, really from launching rockets to launching companies, from a Friday night high school football game to the Super Bowl halftime show. I mean, security teams, coaches, sideline reporters, maybe even athletes themselves in the future. But Riedel Bolero has been wildly successful in supporting all these, but we're not naive to the responsibility that comes with success. More wireless systems are side by side at these events, used by different groups. Some say Riedel on them, some don't. In just a few years.
Matthew, don't share that screen.
In just a few years, these just the sheer number of wireless users have grown exponentially in any given shows, right? So all of this, of course, requires coordination, and the folks on this call and most listening are no stranger to RF coordination. But I think this is a unique kind of coordination. I think users having to plan and deal with it on site could benefit from both the background and the science, what Matthew will go through here, but also real world examples of workflows and tips and tricks that only comes with experience of the other people on this call. So I think it's gonna be a great couple hours. I wanna thank you for having us on and for everything you do to educate and further the industry, guys. With that, I'd like to hand it over to Matthew Dietzler, Riedel Communication System Consultant.
All right, am I showing the correct screen now?
Yeah, you're on your
Excellent. So we should be seeing the DECT coordination with Bolero, and I did name it that to go along with the name of today's session. But like Kelly was saying, it's not necessarily coordination; it's more cooperation. But we're going to be looking at what DECT is, a background of how it operates, and we're going to dive into how you can use our advanced monitoring RF application to accomplish larger and scale up your systems and make everything a little bit larger. So like I said, my name is Matthew Dietzler. I'm with Riedel System Consulting here in the US. I'm based out of the Orlando area. So if you are a Orlando native, go ahead and hit me up on LinkedIn. Would love to meet some more of my Orlando friends. Been here since about December 2020, right before the January 2020, I should say, right before the pandemic hit. Got to do a Bolero presentation with these guys before. So I just want to say thank you for having me again. Excited to be here, excited to share this, and I'm very excited to learn what you guys are doing out in the field to grow your systems and sort of some of your tips and tricks as well. We're going to talk about that from a Riedel standpoint, but we're also going to talk about it. I want to know from your standpoint what everything is going on. So first of all, so we're all on the same page. What is DECT? DECT is Digital Enhanced Cordless Telecommunications. It's a standard primarily used for creating cordless telephone systems. It's near global license free for bidirectional wireless communication and that 1.9 range. I say near global license free because there are some regions in Asia Pacific that do not allow any sort of DECT transmission at all. It is very much a forbidden zone. So they use 2.4. We're going to talk mostly DECT in the US. We'll reference DECT in the European Union a little bit in these first couple slides. DECT in the US is 1.92 to 1.93, 100 milliwatt peak. That's the max, that's 20 dB, and 4 milliwatt average. And then there's 5 total carriers with 10 usable time slots. So that's where we get the 50 time slot region. You've probably heard from that from the start with Bolero if you're familiar with using Bolero. Initially when it came out, we said, oh, you can do up to 50 belt packs. Well, now that statement has been revised and saying, oh, we can do more than 50 belt packs. We can do up to 250 belt packs. You can even accomplish larger systems with that when you start trunking systems together or with, separating things out in a fiber ring. It becomes a really unique strategic planning process to get those larger systems in place. But it is doable, and we're going to talk about the tools and the knowledge that you guys need to have to accomplish that. So the time slot overview. The DECT spectrum is broken up into these frequency bands. In the European Union, they have 10 frequency bands. In the US, we have 5 frequency bands. So bands 1 through 5. And as we move along, we are going to focusing on those US breaking up into 12 time slots each. Now I said 10 usable time slots, and the reason is we have to reserve 2 of those time slots for play nice and reliable handover since it is license free. So how does Riedel use those time slots? So Riedel specifically uses the time slots. One Bolero belt pack equals one time slot. And Bolero is 7K audio with its BV32 codec that we use. There are other manufacturers on the market that use dual time slots. So that right there allows for Bolero to kind of pick and choose where it's going to go when it starts doing its automated frequency hopping, because it allows us to get into those zones. Whereas, some competitors, they have to use dual time slots based on their codec. They have to use 2 consecutive time slots. So that really gives a competitive advantage for Bolero, because we're able to slot in wherever we need to, versus a dual time slot needing 2 consecutive time slots. It can be a bit of a challenge. So one time slot equals one belt pack, and per the DECT protocol, the belt packs will hop time slots and frequencies as needed based on, a wide variety of factors, signal, noise floor, or if whatever multipath issues, you'll notice that as they hop around time slot. And that is all automatically done within what we call the advanced DECT receiver technology in Bolero. If you ever attended a Bolero presentation, I think we say that phrase ADR about 50 times. The advanced DECT receiver allows for that frequency hopping. And we're going to talk about, and not only the frequency hopping, but the frequency hopping at a level that you don't even know that you're changing frequencies. So all of this is happening while we impose this 256-bit AES encryption, which is great. Everyone always asks about security and encryption. It is encrypted. It is secure. It is very, very difficult to break. So looking into capacity and how we do these systems and scale these systems, what is the capacity in a pure DECT environment? And we say pure environment, we mean single manufacturer DECT-based devices, no third parties like cordless phones or other DECT intercom systems operating. In a pure DECT environment, we can do 50 belt packs with the 50 time slots. Now, there's the key factors, and when we talk about even growing that, it becomes even more than 50 belt packs. So the key factors: number of frequency bands. In the US, we have the 5 bands. The number of antennas in your system, the overlap of those antennas, maximum antenna count per given area, and then the interference. So this is where we start talking about how do we get more than 50 belt packs. And we're going to go through all of this today. Now, a nice little segue here is this presentation goes very much hand in hand with that white paper in the handouts. So if you're reading through the white paper, there's a lot of information that we cover in here, and you're going to get more detailed explanations in the handouts. So be sure to reference those as well, because it's going to really help. I've learned a lot. I've read that paper probably 50 times. I think I pick up something new every time I read it, or a different interpretation of how I can do things based on what I'm looking at and the overlap that I'm needing and all of that. So when we look at the number of antennas in a system, one antenna space, so a singular antenna can house 10 belt packs in Riedel world. One radio area, this is where we're going to start talking about near field antenna spacing versus far field antenna spacing. So we can do, in the US here, 25 antennas, all in a very highly condensed area. And you'll notice in that graphic, all of those antennas have heavy overlap. So those antennas are all basically on top of each other, probably all within like a 50-foot radius. So they all have lots of overlap. You have a high density area. We're going to get 50 belt packs in that one area, and that's how we're going to accomplish that. Well, when we start looking at growing those systems over those 50 belt packs, we start talking about far field antenna spacing. So near field, the antennas are close, they have overlapping. Far field, we're starting to space them out. And what does that overlap look like? What's the distance that we need to space them out to achieve this? So with these overlapping, you'll notice here in antenna 2, then antenna 100, we have this nice little arrow. They're not overlapping antennas, they're in different spaces. They can use the same frequencies. So, in traditional frequency coordination, we say never use the same frequencies. We don't want to have any sort of issues. With DECT, there's enough spacing that we can create that reusing frequencies doesn't really have an effect on the performance of the system. So this is how we grow those systems to 100 belt packs or 250 belt packs and 100 antennas in a net. And like I said, systems greater than that are theoretically possible when we start looking at splitting things up between artist frames. If we have several different artist frames, now we can create our own Bolero nets and we can do it all that and that way by trunking them together or doing them in a fiber ring or what have you, which we can talk about. I know that there's a couple of questions that have already popped up about that, and we'll continue to talk about that in our open dialogue. So with Bolero Net, we know that there's the standalone link and standalone 2110 mode. Per the processing of that system, 100 belt packs can be used, and an integrated artist system, 250 belt packs can be used. So now we want to talk about overlap and kind of planning where we want to put our antennas. So when we have our two antennas, we can see we have no overlap here. They're part of the same system. Typically what this means is you have to walk, about 1,000 feet line of sight. And then you can pick up on the next one, right? So you're gonna, at the edge of these two antennas, you're gonna have very poor coverage because you're at the very edge of what it can cover. So we do want to have some overlap to make sure that, there's that seamless handover, because when they're completely segmented like this, now we're totally, we're not creating a total seamless system. So just as a note, for those people that are planning out their system, when you're using Bolero, there's a mode that you can go into in the service menu called Walk Test and Walk Test Pro. And when you're walking, you're going to notice that the dBm levels are fluctuating. You're going to see transmit errors up and down, transmit errors and receive errors. And then around 75 to 80 dBm, that's when the system begins to look for handover. Now, you can be at 80 dBm with no errors and your belt pack will work completely fine. Once you start, that's in line of sight, obviously. Once you start having reflections and all of that, then the signal is going to deteriorate. It's going to look for that handover. If there is nothing to hand over to, then you're going to experience poor audio, right? So when you're planning out your system, put up that first antenna, start walking, and you hit that 75, 80 dBm, that's when you know, hey, this would be beneficial for me to put out another antenna.
Matthew, I just wanted to point out that when I walk test, I wear two belt packs, and I talk on one and I listen on the other, because when you're listening to the belt pack, you're hearing the side tone created within the belt pack, and you can earlier hear when an antenna is not working so well by listening on the other belt pack to see when it starts dropping out.
I like that. Honestly, I'm going to start recommending people do that. That's a fantastic way to do your walk test, because then you even get, like people were saying, now you get a better representation of what that audio even is to reflect what you see in the errors. So with zero overlap, 100% of the time slots and frequency is reusable. So we know that within antenna 1 and antenna 2, we could probably put more antennas in both of those areas if there's no overlap. Now we have one system with two spaces that can both handle 50 time slots. That means we hit that 100 belt pack mark in a given space. So we're doing well. So obviously we need to have some overlap though, right? We don't want to segment our system so much that we're nearing the edge of an antenna before it connects to a new antenna every time. That's not going to be kosher for everybody. People are going to be upset. Hey, my belt pack keeps breaking up. So we need to have some sort of overlap to have that seamless handover to continue. So the magic number is approximately 15 dB of power separation. If the power separation is greater, then they will not interfere with each other. That is approximately 120 feet apart. So if you start walking, and you may notice this, and it's going to vary in venue to venue. This is in an open air, perfect decked environment situation. You might have some venues where there's some high reflections, and you're gonna see that might be shorter, that might be longer, but generally about 120 feet of separation or more. Antenna 1, antenna 2, you're still going to have 100% reuse of frequencies possible in that situation. So we're good there. Now, when we want to create, some higher density areas of antennas, if the power separation is less than 15, the antennas cannot reuse those same frequencies or time slots. So that's when you start talking about, oh, if I want to have 50 belt packs in this area, I need at least 5 antennas to do it. Those antennas now can have a good selection of overlap to cover this one area. And then if I want to get outside of that area, now I need to start thinking about my spacing a little bit more as I go away. So growing a system beyond 50 bell packs, what I just referenced there. So this is a better example of that. Now we have 50 bell packs in this system over here with a high density, lots of overlap. We have an antenna that can connect the two spaces together. So you can walk seamlessly through all of this. And 50 bell packs on one, 50 bell packs. Now we have a 100 bell pack system, all with seamless handover. And then if you want to continue to add on to that, you can as well. So those non-overlapping antennas, reusing those same frequencies. And we can take what we learned about antenna spacing using Walk Test Pro, using 2 bell packs like what Pete recommended, which I think is still, that's probably my biggest takeaway from this so far. If I'm going to go do a show, I'm going to start doing that, because now I have the ability to hear the audio, know if it's good or bad, and be way more accurate with my antenna spacing. But the question is, what if the venue's too small to achieve this separation, right? We're not in perfect environments. We're not all in giant convention centers. Sometimes we're in smaller ballrooms. Sometimes we're in smaller arenas. Sometimes we're in smaller backstage areas, and we need to have a higher density of bell packs in those given areas, some of those staging areas, right? So Bolero has a programmable RF power advantage, so we can turn the power down. So normal power is going to give you up to 20 dB. That's that 100 milliwatt transmission. I did confirm these numbers with our product management. Every time you turn the power down, it's about a 7 dBm drop. So low power and then ultra low power. This is on a per net basis. It's not on a per antenna basis yet. But what that means is if you have 4 antennas and you put them out there, you can cover with maximum range, and you can do a good amount of bell packs in this given area. Or you can go in and say, I want to turn the power down, and I want to put a maximum amount of antennas out there. Now I can put 16 antennas out there, going to cover roughly the same areas that 4 antennas would, and now I can have a higher density of bell packs in this given area. So that's something to think about when you're doing your systems and you're trying to get into an area where you go, man, I really need to get about 75 bell packs into this given zone, but I don't have the separation to make it happen. That's when we start looking at, well, let's turn the power down, let's put on more antennas, and then we can get more bell packs in that given space. Now, the trickiest thing here, I think, for everybody is when we're going into a situation where there are multiple systems. This happens quite a lot in production, in the corporate world, in the concert world, in the broadcast environment. It's everywhere, right? We walk into a system. We know we have Bolero, but then we know that there are 2 other third-party systems, and there's 2 more Bolero systems on top of it. How does that work? How does that happen? We still can use that rule of 15 dBm of separation to achieve the reusable time slots, but that's where it gets tricky when we start have systems that overlap. So ideal situations, they're totally separated. We have the 15 dBm of separation or complete isolation of power. System A cannot see System B cannot see System A, everybody's happy. This is perfect. This is the perfect world, but we don't live in perfect worlds, right? So the systems are isolated and there's no sync issues. So the big question is what happens when there is overlap? What's going on there? So in the center, if these systems are not synchronized together, you'll see in the chart on the right, we have 2 synchronized systems, and then the non-synchronized systems, where there's that overlap, if they're not time aligned correctly, when a time slot appears to be used, it will show that it's in use, even though it may not be fully in use by the other system, which can cause the shift, System A thinking that System B doesn't have open time slots so that it can move in that area. And now we have this misalignment. We have this problem in this specific region where we cannot get enough density of bell packs. It doesn't matter if we put out more antennas, that overlap exists. We're going to have a non-sync issue and we're going to run into problems. So the way to combat this is use the same external clock. With Bolero, it's a lot easier because if everything's on the same network, you can use the same PTP master. Keep in mind, Bolero antennas can be PTP masters. They can only clock up to 32 devices. So that's something to keep in mind if you are in a transparent clock situation. If you're in a boundary clock situation, which transparent versus boundary clock is a longer discussion for probably a different day. But the boundary clock is a lot more scalable than the transparent clock. Think of it as like your Luminex switches as your transparent, and your Cisco Nexus 9K switches or your Arista corporate level switches as your boundary clock. I do think Luminex has a boundary clock coming eventually, but who knows? So if you sync everything up, you're going to be all good to go. Everything's on the same PTP master. So with that 32 devices a Bolero antenna can clock, that refers to panels, cards, and antennas. The belt packs themselves are not PTP devices. Those are DECT devices. So those don't need PTP timing. The PTP is in the antenna, panels, and cards. And then so same thing with Bolero third-party systems. We can talk about, kind of going back to this slide. System A and System B one could be Bolero, one could be a third party. I'm not sure. This is where I'm going to need help from the public here. Some of those third-party systems, can they be clocked externally, or do they have to use their own internal clock? Because if they can achieve that same sync that Bolero can through a PTP clock, then this issue resolves itself by just keeping everything in sync. Otherwise, you want to go by that power separation. Pete?
I have experienced this on shows, the one that Kelly and I worked on, the presidential debates, where we had several different users of 1.9 in the room adjacent to our venue. And we were using a not Bolero, but another system. And what I was able to do is between the close antennas to each room on each side, I put a screen to prevent the antenna from really working well in that direction. And by screening both the ones in the other room that were near me and the system that I was in, I eliminated most of the problem.
So basically what you did by using the screen is you created this segmentation to make sure that there wasn't any synchronization issues, so that you could use all the time slots you needed for your room. I mean, that's a great way to combat the directionality of the antennas.
You can buy circular screens made for cooking pizza in your oven, and those are perfect thing to take to put between your screens.
Yeah, there's also I think even on Amazon, there's like Faraday material that you can buy in a roll and roll it out and put it over a piece of cardboard as well, and tape it on there and carry it with you as well. So yeah, those are nice little tips and tricks as well to keeping your system segmented. So for third party, obviously went through this slide already, and for third party, we can think of it as, the best thing to do is make sure that there's some sort of segmentation, whether it's the power differentiation between the two or completely segmented so that they don't see each other at all. It's really when you start getting into that overlap, that's when you have to start worrying. And Pete experienced that, and that's a really great tip and trick for those users. So you want to avoid that misalignment, because that's gonna result in a lower capacity. That's where it really comes into. That's where it gets really tricky when people are starting to scale up and they say, oh, well, I want to do this, this, and this, but they're all separate systems. If they're all clocked together, honestly, you're going to get a better performance out of your system. Multipath tolerance, this is in our typical Bolero presentation, but this is how Bolero combats interference and noise and all of that, and that's that unique ADR technology. And I like to show this because it really helps, and it really helps understand what Bolero is doing, and it is the best class radio reflection tolerance out there. I know this because I got to work with multiple systems coming from a rental market going into Riedel, so I had a little bit of knowledge of some of what the competition was doing, and knowing that Bolero was definitely outperforming in some specific venues, and it was very reliable. So with multipath reflection, the idea is we got this beautiful little car, got the antenna, he's listening to the radio, and if that's hitting a bunch of different buildings and coming and arriving at different times, now we have these phase issues, and we have ghosting in these transmissions. You've probably heard it before. It sounds awful in your ear, and that phase shifting is either constructive or destructive interference. So what Bolero does is it's going to with that multipath, it's going to lock onto the best signal, and it's going to cancel out the remaining issues that are coming in. It's going to keep all of that from falling off. And while it's holding on to that best signal, it's always going through its algorithm process, going, what's the next best thing? I'm going to hang on to this until it deteriorates to a point that it's starting to go south. oh, now I can grab this. And so it's always going around. It's always auto sensing where it can jump to next. And that's where we don't necessarily have to worry about coordination, but we have to sort of think about what is our antenna placement, what's happening over here. If we start experiencing dropouts in a specific location, we don't necessarily think, oh, DECT is just a bad thing. It might be, oh, my antenna placement is probably performing poorly. And we're going to talk about that and how to achieve a better performance of our antenna placement by showing you the RF scanner. So that, like I said earlier, that's that unique DECT receiver, differentiates between multipath reflections, can cancel it, and then the phase delay to increase the signal to noise ratio in that RF layer. So very high performance, real-time process. It's always adapting, it's always changing. So this is a fun slide to show. So it makes usable in highly challenging reflective environments. The stadium that's shown here is in Germany. This is where they initially started beginning the testing of Bolero, and the graph here showed the blue line showed the best existing DECT technology at the time, and then the red line is when it was optimized for performance. You can see that the errors significantly dropped and are able to perform in those environments. So they thought that was the worst DECT environment in the world. Turns out it's two of them are here in the U.S. It's Lucas Oil Stadium and AT&T Stadium in Indianapolis and Arlington, Texas. And Bolero is successfully working in both locations, both for a variety of companies that are going in and out of their in-house production, as well as tours and entertainment and everything else. So we've had very good success optimizing the ADR technology to work in those challenging environments. So the RF monitoring application, the advanced RF monitoring app, and this is really a phenomenal tool for intercom engineers and A2s and comm techs to use out in the field. And we're going to walk through a couple of slides, and then we're going to look at how we can use this to get better performance out of our system. Before we do that, is this a good time to go through some of the questions that have popped up?
Yeah, I think it would be.
Okay, I think it is too.
The ones I marked in yellow, if you have it open on your screen, are real questions. You can just look through them yourself.
So yeah, so we've got multiple artist frames linked together over fiber, large space. What is audio latency and handoff lag between systems when they're trunked together in one seamless wireless across multiple sites? It's going to depend on where those sites are, how far apart they are, and what your network is. The audio latency from the antenna to the belt pack round trip is going to be 40 milliseconds. When we start talking about large systems, like if we're trunking systems together and we got a system we've got a system in Dallas, Texas, and we got one in Orlando. If we're talking about that far apart, we're talking about how good is your network at that point, and you're going to want to have PTP GPS synced clocks in both locations, so that way the timing and the accuracy of everything on both sites is as close as possible. And what that's going to give you is going to give you latency that's very minuscule. I did a proof of concept with a client where we had one here in Florida, we had one in Washington State. We had two artist frames trunked together over a VPN using AES-67 trunk lines, and the latency was it was less than what a webinar or a Teams call was going to be. We were talking on the Bolero, and we went, I have to hang up this Teams call because the Teams call was a full word behind. So it is very fast. In terms of like actual timestamp numbers, milliseconds, a couple hundred milliseconds generally, and that's all going to depend on how fast your network connections are and what sort of timing you have in place in network switches as well. So that's probably that question in specific is probably better to be gone through more specifically in a offline conversation with your sales manager of your region and your system consultant of that region, so we can get more specifics.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to, that's, I think came up, that's an excellent point you're making here, and I think this is where we're going to start to see a pivot point, is around leader clocks. You just referenced that with the GPS, on both ends, when you have a very large, a large distance between networks, right? Meaning different ways of that connectivity. But more importantly, as we're talking about third-party pieces, you'll see in the questions, there's a few questions around this. So I'll let you and Pete talk about some of the other questions around PTPs and things like that, maybe just on a very high level. But I think leader clocks are going to become that unifying. This is, to me, from an audio perspective, we used to have this battle around, okay, who's going to be, the clock for audio, and I got to have my Big Ben, and I got to have, this is the same but different, right? We're in a different situation here where, number one, this is beyond just managing audio quality, number one. Number two is we get scalability as we start to integrate these higher quality devices in our network. As we can see from the chats, there are a lot of belt packs being put to use now, and a lot of network endpoints, right? And for those of you out there maybe coming into the industry who are like, well, I really like the RF coordination. Well, I would suggest that you start embracing the network manager role that is part of the RF management, not necessarily the overall network, but I think we have emerged into that new window where you've got to be able to live in a few of these simultaneously. So I'll let you speak to some of these other questions like that, but that's just what I wanted to bring up around the leader clock, because I think that is the future, and really just even on smaller systems, as people are building out, just building that right from the beginning.
The difference I found by using a master clock is one programming difference is you don't have to specify your antennas to be a main and a backup and to be a clock. Everything is just right out of the box, and you can just be much more reliable having a master clock, even on less than 32 antennas.
Yeah, absolutely. Because what you're going to get out of an external clock is a better clock class. So that means it's going to be more precise. It's going to be more efficient. You're going to get just a better network performance overall from your systems. So addressing some of the clocking questions going through here, we've got single Bolero antenna can clock up to 32 devices. Does it completely fall apart at 33? No, it does not completely fall apart at 33. You're just going to start to see a lack of performance, and there are ways around this, right? The panels and the cards don't adhere to as strict of timing that Bolero does, because the DECT protocol really needs to be very precise. The precision of that is 1,000 nanoseconds. If your clock deviation goes above 1,000 nanoseconds, your Bolero has to then drop and resync and come back up. So as you add more devices, you get over that 32 mark, you're going to start to see potential delay as you continue to go. Now, what you can do to combat that is to put your panels into asynchronous mode, and Riedel calls it synchronous mode. It's this made-up word that means asynchronous, but that will allow you to segment your network a little bit, maybe put your panels on a different VLAN and have all of your Bolero on its own VLAN. Now you have more accurate clocking happening on the Bolero VLAN, and then on your panel VLAN, you have a little bit more deviation because the panels have a lot more forgiveness. I think I addressed the GPS sync. They do work for syncing up the same two systems, because when they're GPS synced, they're synced to one clock now that keeps everything in time at their two locations. Let's see. Best way to clock your systems. Typically, when you're planning out your network, you're almost always going to have a spine and leaf architecture, or a core switch, which is your spine, and then your leaf switches that come down. It's always going to be best to have your clock on that main core switch that everything kind of filters back into. That's going to give you the most efficiency in your clocking. Let's see. Explain PTP. Yeah, so just PTP in general for those that don't necessarily have any sort of knowledge. That is PTP, Precision Time Protocol. And in Bolero, and mostly when I'm saying in Bolero world, I'm going to refer to SMPTE 2110 standards, which is the media over IP specification for video, audio, and ancillary data over a network. The specification is SMPTE 2110/10, which is outlining PTP v2 as the main clocking mechanism for your system. And what that's doing is the leader clock is going to send out a sync message, which is going to go through your network and hit your end device, who's going to send a reply message, and it sends out a couple times back and forth. It determines the deviation of it, and kind of subtracts everything off to keep in time. That's just kind of the generic overview. And there are two clocks out there, transparent clock, and what the transparent clock does is it adds the processing time of getting the PTP signal through the switch to the endpoint and back, and then the end user just basically says, oh, that was the processing time, subtracts it off and goes, I'm in sync. And then what the boundary clock does is the leader clock will go into a boundary clock, which is the switch. It will terminate the signal and create a new master leader clock signal on the port, and then send that out. So there's less back and forth happening on your network to keep everything in sync. We could probably do a full 2-hour talk on just PTP. I think we did a practical show tech on this 2 years ago. It was with Stephen Remick. If you guys know where that is at, I think it's on YouTube. I think a link would be helpful to post there. Stephen does a tremendous job at explaining PTP, a lot more than I will, because he is like our network guru here at Riedel. And then if you need any additional information, you can always contact System Consulting at Riedel. And we should have some recordings as well that we can share with you that you can read through and watch on how a PTP in a networked media environment works. We talk about multipath tolerance. Will the audio drop on the belt pack? It's not going to be a full drop unless you completely lose signal from the antenna. You're going to miss words. You're going to have a digitization of your words. The ones and zeros aren't going to line up. So it's going to start sounding like that's what's going to sound like in your ear. So there's not going to be a full dropout until you are outside of that multipath zone. What that's going to be reflective as, if you're doing a walk test pro, you're going to, and you walked into that area, do what Pete says, bring your one belt pack to talk and listen, one to look at the walk test. You're going to see errors on the walk test pro in like the hundreds. And that's when you know, hey, there's either one, multipath problems here, or two, I'm just outside of my coverage zone and I need to think about moving my antennas around. Another question, if two systems are not connected to each other, but both grandmasters are locked to GPS, is frequency coordination good enough? Yeah, I mean, absolutely. That's the idea, right? So you're still going to want to make sure that there's both. Yeah, no, that should work just fine.
And Matthew, just as a note, if anybody goes to our Practical Show Tech, practicalshow.tech website, we got links back to all of our archived sessions. Yeah. And like you said, awesome. that networking one, I had a lot of hand cramps and brain cramps because it's really good, and you'll need to watch it a couple times, especially in light now of all the hardware we have available to us. I did see an interesting question here around the mid-size systems with the example of a 50 Boleros with 30 panels, and do you recommend a PTP leader clock or simple boundary switch in that kind of situation? The VLAN thing you pointed out was a really great example of having the two on separate VLANs, but any thoughts there? Yeah, I think it really boils. And which question are you looking at? I see. This would be. Oh yeah, there we go. Mid-size systems. There we go. 50 Boleros. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so like I said earlier, it doesn't matter how many Bolero bell packs you have. It all depends on how many antennas you have. So you can have 50 Boleros, but only have 5 antennas. That's only 5 devices. The 50 Boleros don't count against your PTP clock.
There you go.
So, you know, asking Riedel, if you ask anybody at Riedel that question, we're always going to say, if you want to guarantee that it's going to work every time, put a boundary clock in. Obviously, we know that's not financially going to work for a lot of people. So you have to be strategic about which things you're going to be looking at. We've had great success with Luminex. We've started, Netgear has their new line of switches, the M4250s, which have a transparent clock. Those we're starting to see some success with. I personally have gotten to sample one of them. I have a 9-port switch on my desk. I put 4 antennas with 2 NSAs and 8 bell packs on it. It was rock solid. So I imagine that it's going to behave very similar to the Luminex switches. But yeah, for those mid-sized systems really become tricky. And where is that line of when does a transparent clock not good enough and the boundary clock needs to take over? But like I said, it's always going to be that those panels don't have as strict of a timing requirement. So it's really about the number of Bolero antennas that you're putting into a system.
Hey, Matthew, I had a question from an outside source.
Yeah.
You can go through the system here. With the 2.4 version of Bolero coming out, does that have ADR as well?
So the 2.4 has an adapted version of the ADR technology, because 2.4 is not DECT. So it's not a full-blown DECT system, right? It's 2.4. But what they've done is they've taken the ADR technology, they've adapted it for 2.4 so that it will work. Now, I know we're talking mostly DECT here, but it's a nice little segue to say that Riedel does have a 2.4 solution now to go with the 1.9 version of Bolero. They do work hand in hand together. So you can have a mixed ecosystem. So in those situations where you have a very challenging DECT environment, you cannot get over, let's say it's not a pure environment, you're going into the system, maybe you've done a site survey, and no matter what you've tried, it's like, we're not going to be able to get more than 40 antennas in here, no matter which if, ands, or buts of how we move stuff around. Okay, cool. Bring in some 2.4. You still adhere to the limitations. So up to 250 bell packs in integrated, those can be 1.9 and 2.4 together. In standalone, they'll work side by side, 1.9, 2.4. You can even link the antennas together. You can go 1.9, 2.4, 1.9, 2.4, and it'll work seamlessly. So it's still a unified system, and that will allow you to grow as needed, which is really handy.
There was a question, is there going to be a hybrid 1.9 and 2.4 antenna?
I don't believe so. I think they're due to some of the technology and the differences between the technology, those are going to have to stay separate. They are different colors though. The Bolero 1.9 are gray and the 2.4 are black. So good to know. Good question about 2.4 Bolero here. Foresee any issues using it? Honestly, all I've heard from the people that have used it so far are that it works just as well as 1.9. And it has performed really well in 2.4 challenged environments with a lot of Wi-Fi going on, a lot of other things going on. So I would say go ahead and give it a try for sure. I think you'll be very happy with it. Yeah, lots of clocking questions. I like this. This is good stuff.
The 2.4 issue, the only place I foresee it being a problem is if your client is a network switch company. Let's say if you're doing a Cisco show, they would feel they don't want anybody else being in their 2.4 band, even though it actually has extremely low effect on it. So that's something to consider when you're planning to use 2.4.
Yeah,
absolutely.
To point, that's a good conversation to have. I just recently used your new 2.4 system, Matthew, over in Asia, and was very, very happy with the performance sonically with it was identical, and really, again, behaved almost identically. I didn't have the ability, because I didn't have a 1.9 system in place there due to regulatory issues. So I was very thankful for the 2.4, which is something to be thinking about, because outside of the US, 1.9 isn't necessarily a license free everywhere on the planet, right? So
Yep. Yep.
the fact that we can have the same exact operational ecosystem regardless of 2.4 or 1.9 is very, very helpful. So like I said, I had a really good experience with it. So for what that is worth. And then if folks look in there in the chat thing, I put a link to our Practical Showtech past webinars, specifically the 2110 session that you were referencing a little earlier with Stephen. And so people can go back and rewatch that for theirs. And I saw some requests on recommendations for gear. So I'm going to take this from you so you don't have to be putting out these third-party recommendations. My personal experience, I like the Studio Technologies products. The 5402 is an example of a great leader clock with a GPS GLONASS option that can be added to it. Plays with both Dante and AES 67. And as an individual who's got to live in both the audio and the comms world, I like products that do that. Obviously, in larger broadcast facilities, that will be a different product. But if you're thinking about standalone types of devices, that would be something I would give a serious look over personally.
Yeah, thanks for taking that. It's hard to recommend a clock because there are literally thousands of them out there.
For sure, there's a lot of ways there. Absolutely, that's
absolutely.
one of just many. So
yeah,
I think the addition of the 2.4 system is terrific because it facilitates using Bolero around the world, because 2.4 is a universal band everywhere. I don't know about one single place that you can't use 2.4, whereas 1.9, you need to have your antennas readjusted for most other countries. So when you take your USA antennas over to Europe, you've got to send them into Riedel and they'll adjust them for the Bolero in Europe. So
yeah, it's definitely that was. And when we announced the 2.4, I was kind of like, well, why are we going into 2.4? And then I had a conversation with a good friend of mine at NAB New York, and he was like, oh man, I'm excited for it, and I can do this, this, and this. And I was like, well, now I understand why we have 2.4. This is awesome. I love it. Like, so I'm glad to hear that you guys have used it. I'm glad to hear that it went well. I'm excited to actually get my hands on it because I know that there's some things that even outside of DECT, like how do we frequency cooperate with 2.4? So there's gonna be some information that will need to be shared there. I do want to say that there's a lot of questions that are like, we have a lot of questions here that are like AES67 cards with X amount of panels and X amount of Boleros. Do I need this or this? And it's like, I think the blanket statement here is every situation is under different circumstances, right? The Bolero antenna clocking 32 devices is it going to fail if it's a 33rd device? No, it's not going to fail. It's going to go back to my answer there before. And this goes along with another question of how does the math in calculating how many followers an external clock can have? It depends on the clock class. So Bolero antennas have a specific clock class that only allows it to clock X amount of devices. Obviously, an external clock that's specifically built to clock more devices is going to have better success, and it's going to be as elected as its master clock, leader clock over a Bolero antenna every time because of this. So as I keep saying this, Bolero has the stricter of the PTP timing in that 1,000 nanoseconds. The panels have a little bit of deviation because you can adjust the buffer time, you can adjust the buffer packets, and so you can make sure, or you can run those completely in asynchronous mode so that they will still stay on the network. And I've had to do that several times in and of itself, where I've gone into a situation. It was at a trade show a couple months ago, and I could not get a panel to stay online no matter what I tried. It was and it was set up in a boundary clocked situation. And I was like, this is bugging the crap out of me. And I put it into asynchronous mode, and it locked, and it stayed locked. And I said, I'm done. I'm going to leave it as that. And there we go. So it really boils down to, yes, absolutely. If you've got 50 panels and you've got 10 antennas, could you get away with a transparent clock off of a Bolero antenna? Probably. Are you going to have to plan around it? Probably do some segmentation of your VLANs to get your panels on one VLAN, run them connected to something else? Probably. Yes, it is possible. But it's hard to go through every, because it's literally, I think I see 10 different questions, all a variation of the same thing. The one thing that I will say is that an AES67 card has a lesser clock class than a Bolero antenna and should never ever be used to clock Bolero. An AES67 card can be used to clock panels because of the timing for the panels, but it will not work with Bolero. I think that should cover all of those questions.
It does, and I think there's one topic. Let's just take this one last question, and then we'll move, because this next segment I think is really going to be very interesting, moving into being able to look at the band. But just real quick over the licensing question. So if I have a 1.9 standalone license and I add a 2.4, do I need a 2.4 standalone license for that radio now?
That is a great question, and no, because it is one ecosystem, right? So if you're creating a standalone ecosystem and you have your 1.9 system already up and running, and you're just adding 2.4 into it, it literally just integrates seamlessly, like it's just Bolero.
Like it's another 1.9. So it's a Bolero radio. So I have one standalone license, and all my Bolero antennas, regardless of band, fit under that standalone license, just like they would with just a single.
The only license that you're not going to be able to use with 2.4 is the advanced RF monitoring application.
And that's a perfect segue into advanced monitoring, because I think it'll generate some of these other questions, and we do see a lot of these. So we'll keep we'll come back to that. I saw an interesting one around the UIC 128. So we'll save that for the end and come back to that.
Yeah.
That's
so
great.
When we talk about RF scanning, we know we have our traditional RF scanners, right? And the benefits of those scanners, we see the entire RF environment. We see above and below the DECT spacing. We can verify any bleed from the cell towers or any of the other the spaces to see what's happening. Like we have a customer that went into a facility and they saw that the band above DECT was bleeding into the upper end of 1.9, 1.92, like that 1.94 area was bleeding into 1.93. And so we know at that point when we're looking at a scanner, we can go, we don't see that harsh drop off from that LTE signal. We go, oh, now that's bleeding into our stuff. Now we got to get someone on the horn and say, get the heck out of DECT. You're not supposed to be in here. This is license free and you're ruining it, right? That does happen in situations, and it's very nice to have those, and you can see the noise floor. You get a nice visual on that. So yeah, RF scanners, absolutely great thing to have, but there are some benefits that they don't have. You can't see the total details on a time slot basis on your traditional RF scanner. You're going to see the 5 frequency bands and what's happening there. You're going to see the noise floor go up and down, but you're not going to see individual time slot alignment and what's happening, and you can't differentiate between the DECT systems. So you're going to see DECT, you're going to see the bands, you're going to see the hops, but you're not going to see everything. And that's where this comes into play. So same thing that we're talking about here. You only need, with the licensing, you only need one antenna on the network to have this license, and any antenna can now be radio scanner, or all of the antennas can be radio scanners. And when they are in radio scanner mode, you can no longer connect belt packs to it. So that's just something to keep in mind when you're starting to plan, when you're starting to go around. The scan data is stored in the antenna locally, scans about once a minute, 1,440 scans a day, and stores 3 days of data. So just looking at the scanner view, this is really quick overview. You have your start, clear, and this is a little outdated of a slide. We have updated the scanner since this has been created, and we'll get to see that here in a second. We have the history section and the snapshot section. The history section is going to give us our time slot usage and systems on air over a given period of time. So we're going to be able to fully see what that shift is in the timeline and go through, and make sure you put the time and date into your system so you know what's going on and how you can scroll through that. So you can use this in conjunction with like a Walk Test Pro or something like that. as you're putting antennas up to see what that DECT space looks like of that particular antenna. So it shows the number of time slots used, it shows your system on air capacity, and it identifies other DECT systems. So at NAB this last year, we were showing this off. I saw that the Bolero booth in and itself had, I think, 2 Bolero systems. Sony, which was across the hall, they had a Bolero system. We could see Clearcom's FreeSpeak system. We could see RTS Romeo system. So we knew that there were several. At one point, I think there was 8 systems on air that we could see, and our time slot usage was like through the roof. You could just see that graph. It was just going crazy, and based on how people were walking around as well. So you have 2 ways to scroll through time here. The shift timeline selection window, so you can shift back in a period of time. And then this little grayed out window is going to be this systems on air. And then you're able to scroll through those scans individually and see at specific times each minute what that looked like. And then the snapshot overview is super helpful because this shows you additional capacity in the area. Now, if you notice in this snapshot view, there are 10 bands. This is a European snapshot, but it's going to show you additional capacity. And there are 2 numbers here to look at. There's the top number, which can be added without interference, and the bottom number added with reduced working range. So when we talk about reduced working range, that means we can't necessarily go 75, 80 dBm away from this antenna. We might be able to go, right at the antenna, it's about 30 dBm, right? We might be able to go 50 dBm. We might be able to go 55, but maybe there's a noise that's happening over there. It's another belt pack. It's another DECT system. It's a cordless, it's a cordless DECT telephone, something like that. So that's where we're able to see those ranges of high and low interference and what's being blocked and what's being utilized. That time slot map is very handy, and it's going to show you exactly what's being used in each specific band. This is actually how I found out that my neighbor at my old house had a DECT telephone. I put this on, I was playing with it, and I saw DECT stuff come up, and I was like, that's weird. And then she was walking around the backyard holding a DECT telephone, and I was like, all right, I see a DECT telephone. And it showed up as a third-party system and a blocked frequency.
I just wanted to point out to attendees that in your screen, you have a zoom mode. If you want to zoom in and look at that part of the picture where the type is really, really small, you can do that.
We will be looking at the RF scanner in its most updated form as well. So you don't necessarily have to worry about these snapshots and zooming in crazy on them. We're going to cruise through these, and then we're going to open it up, and I'm going to show you a system that's been running for a day in our Santa Clarita office in California. So the flip side of this is now the belt packs. The belt packs now will give you a capacity warning, and you can set this threshold. Default is 3, but it will tell you how many time slots are left in the given area that the belt pack is in. So you'll see that show up as a nice little orange amber signalization, and you'll get a warning that says a time slot warning. And I when this first got debuted, we had people call all the time and freak out. Oh my God, there's a time slot warning. There's not enough time slots. It's like, and then we had to go through this whole thing of this presentation I just gave you, and we talked about it. So this is, talking about antenna spacing, how the overlap works and what we need to do and how we can differentiate between the DECT spacings, and maybe we need to add blah, 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 and antennas and do all that good stuff. So that is there. You can disable those warnings so you don't have people freak out who don't necessarily understand, but it exists so that you can go, hey, I've got time slots that are being occupied in my backstage area. I might need to think about redistributing my antennas in a strategic way so that there is more space so that I have reusable time slots as I move throughout that area. So then there's belt pack radio monitoring view. So monitoring versus scanning. The nice thing about monitoring is the same view. We have the history and the snapshot section. The belt packs can be used for continuous detailed monitoring of the RF environment. So up to 5 belt packs can be used for this. And if you enable this on a belt pack, it can continue to operate as normal, and the user has no idea that you have the monitoring application on underneath them. So you can still talk, you can still listen, you can still push all of your buttons. Now you're just taking information on that belt pack, putting it into a usable, readable format on your machine so that you can see how that belt pack is performing throughout the day. So this is a great tool for you to use while you're running your tests. Use those scanner mode on one of the belt packs. Also use it in Walk Test Pro. Also have another belt pack with you. So 2 belt packs, one in monitoring, one to talk and listen. and listen to how that audio is affected. And now you can see a visual readable format of how that's working. And this will give you an idea of, oh, when I get into this area, is it because there's a lot of time slots being used, or is it because I'm hitting transmission errors, transmission and receive errors? What does that time slot look like? So monitoring mode to me in a belt pack is almost more useful than the antenna, because the belt packs can move around. The antennas are in a fixed location. They see one thing. This is all the antenna's seeing. Whereas the belt pack's going, oh, look at me. I can walk all around. I can do everything I need to do. And I can see the whole DECT RF environment as I walk through a venue. So same thing in that history section, time slot usage, transmission and receive errors. So you're going to see that show up on the graph. Still shiftable timeline, still the same amount of scans, 1 scan a minute, 1,440 scans a day, stores 3 days of data, all of that, all still inside of the belt pack. You're going to see the same thing on the snapshot overview, a nice little time slot map with capacity. You're always going to see a yellow block across, and that yellow block is basically a blind time slot to this belt pack. Basically, it's like it's thinking that it can be, that belt pack will potentially be one of those other time slots. So it will always, you'll always see a yellow line, and that is in reference to that belt pack and what it can and can't see on that specific time slot line. So that's just always going to be there.
In your monitoring, if you're near a cell tower, which may bleed into the 1920 to 1930 band, what will you see in the monitoring? Will it just not assign slots there? This is something brought up by Henry Cohen.
Yeah, that's a great question. So what you're going to see there is you're going to see in your upper, the LTE signals on the upper end of 192. So it starts like right around 193, I should say. So what you're going to see there is you're going to see a lot of low interference or high interference, depending on how powerful that signal is. So in the newer versions of the RF monitoring application, we can adjust the lower threshold and the upper threshold to see where that noise floor is. I had a particular client who was complaining about dropping belt packs at a specific time, like every day. And what we ended up doing we had to use both a traditional RF scanner. I was using the Signal Hound, the Signal Hound BB60C. So I had that set up and the RF monitoring application set up at the same time. And they were experiencing the DECT noise floor, the whole noise floor, just rising and falling. And we were just like, that's insane. I've never seen this before. And so we were able to combat that by putting out more antennas, by putting out a few other things to make sure that even though that signal to noise ratio was deteriorating with this breathing of the noise floor, that we still had coverage because we still had enough antennas strategically placed. And we used the RF scanner and the TTI scanner to see that noise floor coming up, and we could adjust that to see, okay, when it hits minus 75, that's where we know the noise floor is. And that's what I was talking about earlier when you're doing your Walk Test Pro, that reduced working range. It would work really well at minus 50, but it wouldn't work very well at minus 70 or minus 75 because of that problem. All right, so let's look at this application, because I think that's what we really want to see. We want to see the application. So let's do, I think it's this window. Beautiful. Everyone should be seeing the my web browser now with the Bolero Web UI.
We are.
Correct.
Excellent, I love that. So right now we're in an artist integrated situation. We're in our demo room here at California. I'm in Orlando, but this is where we are virtually. I've got a belt pack running in monitor mode, and I've got 2 antennas running in
You could zoom
scanner
in.
mode.
Can you zoom in a little bit on your browser there? There we go. Perfect.
There we go. So what I want to do is I want to look at this. I'm going to look at the 2 antennas and show you the differences between what they see, because I know that they're in 2 locations. So I got to unlock my system first. I don't need to save that. I've got to highlight it. I click the plus sign, and I'm going to open Radio Scanner. So as you can see, little different screenshots than what we had previously. So this is in our CER, central equipment room. We are scanning. I can stop the scan. I can clear the history. And here's where I can adjust those thresholds. So I can see that minus 82, that's my default, and minus 62, that's like my blocked. So if something has a more powerful signal than that, that will show up as a blocked signal. And then if it's in between that, it'll show up as interference. So as you can see here, we have a couple different systems on air. So I can see that time slot usage, and I can adjust this. So full range, 25. So we've pretty much been stuck on looks like 3 time slots for a while. But if we go back to this area, as you can see, we had some other time slots being used. So now I can see, oh, hey, in this instance, some additional time slots are being used. We had a system come online, our service system. And maybe at some other point, if we scroll back to another point in time, we might even see a third system. So it's really handy, as you're seeing here, I can view, oh, here's what's happening at these chunks of time. And now I can go down to my snapshot area and I can see what's happening. So I see some low interference. And if I want to find out where that interference is, where that noise floor is, I simply just bring this up. So let's go to minus 78. I'll hit apply. Okay, it's above minus 78. I'll go it up a little bit more. Let's go to 74. Okay, we saw 1 or 2 disappear. So we know that it's somewhere in there. Maybe even a little bit more. Let's go all the way to minus 70. And it went away. So we know that all that interference that we're seeing, that noise floor, is somewhere between minus 75 and minus 70. So what we can
while
see
you're
now,
scrolling, I'm sorry to interrupt. While you're scrolling through the timeline, where does it pull that date and time from? Is that the system time, or is that was one of the questions somebody had?
So that's a great question. So let me go back to the antennas. That system time is going to come from the internal time and date of the antenna, which you can sync to your local browser, or it can come from a PTP time source or an NTP server. So that's where those timestamps come from. That was a great question. So if I look at this other antenna, let me go ahead and open this radio scanner. We see a lot more movement on this one, like a lot more movement. So we've got time slots in this area. If we scroll back through, we've got 15 time slots being used at one point. As you can see, we have multiple systems that have been online, multiple different IDs that have been online. So these are probably Bolero systems or Bolero antennas that haven't been associated to a DECT space yet. So they're probably standalone, being plugged in or checked by service. They're being powered on just to verify they work, or they're getting prepped for a demo, or something like that, or they're a repair. So someone's plugged it in, it's powered on. They're just verifying that it works. So we can see a whole bunch of these systems coming online this morning. This is Pacific time, so 9:51, 9:53 as we go through. So we see a lot more action on this antenna because it's closer to some other stuff. So now we know that these are in 2 separate locations. In one area, we can get 50 belt packs, and then this other area, since if we verified with Walk Test Pro, we'd be able to see the dBm differences. If it was greater than 15, we'd know we have 2 full separate DECT spaces, and we can get 100 antennas in this area. Excuse me, 100 belt packs in this area. Sorry, I said antennas. That was wrong. But then we see some blocked. So we know that these are probably, these blocked spaces are greater than minus 62. So now we can turn this down and see, how powerful are those? Okay, so now I turned the lower threshold on, so we see more interference. So let's see, we go down to minus 70. They're still blocked. So these have a pretty powerful signal, so we need to go up, sorry. So let's go to minus 58. Okay. Okay, so they're between minus 60 and minus 50, right? So that's where we're starting to see that. So that's where that reduced working range is going to be, right? So now, in theory, we can reoccupy this interfered time slot if the belt pack signal is minus 53 to minus 30. So we've got some dB to work. So if we're very close to the antenna, we can reoccupy that space. If we're farther away from that, we cannot occupy that because it's interfered with by someone else. So like I said, once again, really good information to see there. And then we can see how it's stacked on itself, what that time slot overall usage is with that bar graph. So super useful tool in that manner. So we saw two antennas in 2 separate spaces, which is good to see. The beautiful thing about this is Riedel puts these little question marks into everything, which is basically the manual for it built into the web UI. So you don't have to reference the manual. And honestly, this is a much better readout than the manual is, because I think the RF scanners are in like 2 or 3 different spots in the manual. So like I said, if you ever get a chance to play with it, this is really helpful information. It's going to see all that. And it's a really fun tool to play with. I very much enjoy using it for the sheer fact that I like seeing what's happening in the DECT space, because as a coordinator, you don't get to see that all the time, right? Especially with DECT, you can see the 5 frequency bands and that's about it with your traditional scanner. With this, we get a lot more a detailed readout. So what it looks like from the belt pack point of view, so we have Rick's belt pack here. So let's go ahead and look at what he's doing. Let's open his belt pack monitor. So Rick can continue to use his belt pack as normal. And as you can see, throughout his time, there's been instances where 10, 12 time slots have been used, as little as 4 has been used. And this has been running since pretty early this morning, a couple hours now. And this is where we're currently at. We can see here that throughout that time, he's had no errors. Now, I know that he's probably not going to have any errors because those belt packs are probably just sitting in one central spot. But we can see the time slot map of where he's at. There's a lot more going on. We can see that, hey, there's some belt packs, there's some blocked things here, and there's some low interference and high interference in this time slot map. Now, I will say this, because I've played with it enough that I know this. If you want to artificially create more blocked or more interfered with frequencies, if you stack all of your Boleros on top of each other, like we're told not to do with RF transmitters, you can create artifacts in the DECT that show that there's more time slots being interfered with because you've literally stacked 10 Boleros on top of each other. So don't do that. That's not a good way for this to be read out. Space them out like you people are going to use them. Because if you do the same thing with all of your IEMs or all of your wireless microphones, you're going to have the same problem when you look at your scanner. You're going to see all those intermods pop up and say, oh, we can't use any of these frequencies because they're being occupied by something else. Well, that's not actually the case. So that's just something to keep in mind. Don't stack your Boleros on top of each other and expect a good readout in the belt pack monitoring mode. Okay. So that's just a nice little overview of the RF application. Let's go back to some questions.
So I've got a question for you, Matthew.
Yeah.
Where
absolutely. does
this need to reside, and the app, and what are if I want to, you indicated any antenna can be the monitor, except that it obviously takes it out of belt packs usage, out of service, if you will, for that role. What are some of the licensing things that we need to ask about as technicians if we're going out on a system? Is it one antenna in the network that needs to have this app?
Yeah. So one antenna needs to have the application, and then any antenna on the network, as well as up to 5 belt packs, can be used to access this information.
Now, if you put it on an antenna, that antenna is no longer working for any other purpose, right?
Well, yes and no. So right now, let's look at these 2 antennas I've got here. If I want to, so I've gone into my venue, I've put my antennas out, I've done my scans, and now I need to use that antenna for belt packs. I simply just disable the radio scanner application, and now it's available for belt packs to connect to again.
So do we get more information using an antenna scanner as opposed to a belt pack scanner, or the same?
You get similar information. On the belt pack, you get the receive and transmit errors of that specific antenna, and then on not the specific antenna, specific belt pack, and then on the antennas, you get the readout of third-party systems that are in the area.
Now, if we had that on the stage manager's belt pack, for instance, and he complained that he got kicked off at one point, we could scroll over to where that point was and see what was happening.
Yeah, you could absolutely scroll over to that point, and you would see that either the errors spike up and down. You might see a high time slot usage if there's a big density in that area, or you'll see a low time slot usage compared with your receive and transmit errors, and you go, hey, there's probably a signal problem there, either multipath or just he's out of range.
Is there any way to give belt packs priority for their time slots so they don't get kicked off?
No.
I was just trying to figure out how we could charge more to that person then. It's like, look, I'll keep you on the air, but it's going to cost you.
Exactly. Exactly.
That's
It
a-
could be
that's a
like
good-
a clock.
That's a good idea, but I think that kind of fights against the ADR technology at its core, right? Because it's so auto sensing and it's trying to elect the best things that if you start telling the system that there's priorities in that, then I think it adds another layer to the algorithm.
But where it's
It would be
particularly
great though. It would be
advantageous,
great though.
it particularly advantageous is when you're in a place with a lot of other users, like at NAB.
Yep.
You can see what's happening and see where the issues are and see if everything stops working, all of a sudden you've got somebody else with 80 belt packs right next door to you and they're eating it all up. It's time to send out somebody to knock some knees.
Absolutely.
Pete's getting a little rough in his old age now with cops. Like, look, are you messing with my system? Do not do it.
Violence is not the answer every time, but
It is not, but we will take their packs away.
we will kill. We will disable your packs. You will not.
There you go. I'll let you go through the list. I'm just collecting a couple of my questions, but let's take a look at what some other folks have asked around this, because I did see a number of items coming in. Let's see. I think you addressed this one about warnings coming on when all the belt packs are together, and you did, talk about that there. So, a couple questions about your breathing noise floor and the source.
Breathing noise floor. Yeah.
Were you able to determine the source of the noise in that noise floor example?
No, we were not. We were not. It was the most bizarre thing I think I've ever seen in my life. Just the entire deck noise floor just going, and it was random.
Was it on a show with a lot of other video happening or automation happening or anything like that?
It's like open stadium. It was interesting.
Must have been the NFL football.
Could have been. Yeah, there's one point here that they say that they see that warning come up when they turn on all the belt packs and leave them all together, and that's what I was saying at the end of that. If you just stack your belt packs all in one spot, you create your own anomaly of time slot problems.
Another question, or more of a statement here from somebody, was around if you're using this in monitoring, does that affect the role of that antenna in the clocking if it were set to be the leader?
No, because here, look, I'm actually using this one as a scanner. As you'll notice here, it's got the green PTP. So this one is our PTP master and our scanner.
Right. So we
don't have to worry about that. It can't be the DECT master at that point, from what I remember. I do believe it has to pass those duties off to another antenna.
Was that noisy station near some facility like an airport or a radar station or something like that? They could be
potentially. I mean, it was near a downtown metroplex area, so.
Or a Russian spy network.
Russian spy network. Yeah, it's the Russians from Stranger Things.
Exactly.
Going into the Upside Down, right? Yeah, unfortunately, we never found the cause of that. It's definitely kind of boggled my mind for a while. So I would like to find the source of it if I could, but we'll see if I get back to that venue anytime soon. Alrighty.
Let's see here.
Some of the old questions are is the RF security between 1.9 and 2.4 both encryptable to AES 256?
I believe so. I don't know the answer off the top of my head, but AES 256 is kind of our default encryption setting for our wireless. So I would be shocked if they were not the same.
And why was 2.4 selected versus 5 gig? Which is a wider band, by the way.
I have not asked that question, so that would be a discussion that I'll have with our product management at some point, probably coming up at NAB, and just be like, out of curiosity, why did we pick 2.4 over 5G? Dave just popped in. Maybe he knows.
Oh, I don't know the correct answer probably, but what I've heard is 2.4 was in bigger demand in foreign countries. You know, so there was
Maybe 5 doesn't exist in other countries.
could be, yeah. But I think like most manufacturers, we go with what's in demand sales wise, right? So we hit that first, and then that might drive it.
Do any countries prohibit encryption? I can't imagine. Even without encryption, it's really hard to hear what's going on it. So
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know.
Let's see.
asking for a friend spy.
Yeah, I think, go ahead, Matthew.
I was gonna say it's a really good question if the scan data can be archived off of the antenna. Unfortunately, not at this point. It has been requested by a lot of people, myself included. When I first got my hands on it, I was like, this is great, but can I export this data? And they were like, oh, well, why would you want to do that? Well, I want to review later. I want to do 3 days of data. I want to export it, and I want to review my show at another time. And they were like, oh, that's a good idea. So I'm sure we will see that at some point. I'm sure there's something that's logged internally on the antenna in its deeper log functions that only service and developers have access to. The only problem with that is since it logs 3 days of data, when you continue to run it, it will drop that data. It's just going to fall off its memory. So that's something that's probably taken into consideration, and the ability to
If you
export
really
that.
were concerned about that, you could run a screen recording program on that window.
Yeah, there you go.
There's a question which is not really complete. How can we combine system A and system B? And I don't know whether they mean combine the PL channels or use 1.9 and 2.4 at the same time. Don't know the answer. Incomplete.
Well, I think there was a question in there which I wanted to, Matthew probably see this. Somebody was asking about 2 artist frames that have dark fiber available between them, and whether to co-locate the frames and then put switches at each of those endpoints. What I was going to suggest is, because everybody's application is so unique, I was going to suggest they reach out to Matthew via email. That's at top of the show here, and it's probably in your deck as well. But I would suggest on those very specific questions, reach out. He can either answer it or get you to somebody else on the team, because again, with that, everybody's application is just a little different, and we want to make sure that you're getting that proper information on that as well.
Yeah, to build on that, I've got clients who have dark fiber between facilities who could do one centralized frame and it works great. And then I have another client that they have dark fiber and they're unable to do that for whatever reason. They have to put frames at both locations. So it's all very circumstantial. It's very hard to just kind of give you a generic answer. It's part of why I have a job.
In terms of the noise floor you were talking about, Henry Cohen says it could have been the stadium DAS having improper AGC settings. So it was just sort of pumping the entire spectrum up and down. And in relation to that, I went into a show in a theater that had a brand new 1.9 system. And they said, oh, it works great. It works everywhere. It works except on the stage. So I went and I said, show me all your antennas. And I went up to the catwalk, and on the catwalk, there was this 3-foot wide catwalk. And on one side of the catwalk, they had a 1.9 antenna. And on the other side of the antenna, they had a Wi-Fi access point 3 feet apart. They said, well, even though they're not in the same band, it was 1.9 versus 2.4, the radio receiver is getting overloaded by all that RF being right next to it. And we moved the 1.9 antennas 20 feet away, and bang, everything started working fine. So when you're putting antennas out in a venue, watch the DAS antennas in the hallway, the little cell and or Wi-Fi antennas, and don't put your antennas near them. It will degrade the quality of your radio.
Yeah, that's a great point for sure.
And both are legally allowed to be where they are and could be well within their tolerances, as Henry has pointed out before. It's just, you know, when you're right there at that edge, everybody's within their tolerances, but we again, the cooperating, apparently we're cooperating with more people than I thought. I'm going to have to keep a bigger list now. Here was an interesting question. It was around using Bolero in integrated mode, with one of those antennas being the leader, and then the clock with the artist frame and with the other devices. So I think and then at the end of the question, does my question make sense? I think that's the challenge, is balancing. We're hearing all these different clock sources, right? Can you just maybe give us a quick overview again on that?
Yeah, so the thing that you're going to look for, like in that instance where you have a PTP environment mixed with AES3, specifically the UIC cards can operate in independent sync domains, so which is great. So if everything's segmented that way, and I mean, the big thing here is when you have multiple frames synced together, you want to look at the clock ring master inside the settings of Director, and you can set that to internal or to external. So if you set it to internal, that means that the frame itself is going to act as its master word clock for all of your baseband signals, like your AES3 things and all of that good stuff. And then obviously your PTP sources will still can sync and go off of their PTP devices. So it's almost two separate things to think about, right? So you're going to have your baseband clock, your word clock to get AES3 signals clocked, and you're going to have your PTP clock to get all your PTP signals clocked, and the artist frame itself is going to kind of act as that intermediate to make sure that everything is all synced together.
And here's the clarification for that example of the two frames with dark fiber between them. What they were more curious about was the pros and cons of a centralized system instead of these two independent frames in the different locations, and then the idea of using a single PTP, you know, a leader clock, you know, the IO aside, right? Because that's obviously a different discussion there, right? If you've got to if you're using your frames as audio and on and off ramps, then that starts to answer the question whether that frame needs to be there, but that could still benefit from a central, if it's dark fiber, for instance, could benefit from a central leader clock. It's just a longer connection, right?
Yeah, I think it goes back to we're talking about circumstantial situations. When I look at a design on a client, I want to know their comfort level on, can I run this all off of one central frame with the way your network architecture is? And if the answer is yes, then we go with one specific thing. We have one clock, we have one frame, because the 1024 does 1024 ports, right? I mean, that's gonna solve a lot of problems for a lot of people. It really boils down to how far away is everything from each other, because there is a point in time when you start getting, you know, several miles away. I don't know exact moment where there becomes a latency issue. Now you have to have multiple clocks to keep everything in sync. And what if someone's doing construction on the road and they rip your fiber out? Now you don't have an entire facility that doesn't work. Like, people have to think about those things. So it's a matter of, do I want system islands in the event that happens, so that we have a backup mechanism so these two systems can still talk to each other if that fiber is broken, or if you're comfortable with multiple dark fiber paths to make it work for you. But it's just
right. That risk mitigation is always something.
Right. Yeah, I mean,
Does the software prevent you from setting more than one antenna to be the PTB master primary?
So that's part of the best clock best master clock algorithm, BMCA. So that's part of the algorithm that takes place. In this situation right here, looking at this, I can look at and edit the info of the antenna. And this PTP master is set to 1. So this antenna is going to be the master antenna unless I set another antenna to 1 as well. The best master clock algorithm then is going to go through the PTP master priorities. There's 2 priorities, number 1, number 2. It's going to go through the clock class. It's going to go through all this stuff to elect the best master clock. So if everything's set to the same priority level, it will randomly select one based off of the algorithm.
Is there any interruption of the system when it does that? If it switches between antennas?
Yes. So if this were to lose clock, these belt packs will now drop off and they will have to resync to a new time.
Yeah. I had that I was sent out by Riedel to investigate a problem with a Bolero system on a football show, and they every show they did around halftime, all the belt packs would drop off for 30 seconds, and they had 30-40 belt packs out there, and what it turned out was they had a halftime show stage that got struck at halftime. And the switch on that halftime show stage was elected as a querier, and it had a lower IP than the switch at the truck, which meant that it was using the querier at the halftime stage. And as soon as I took the querier away, the whole network, not the antennas, but the network says, I don't know where my IGMP is. Where am I going to go? And it just kicked everybody off. And as soon as we turned that off, they were fine.
Yep.
They could strike and put it back on without any problem.
That's a great observation there.
Yeah.
Here was another question, just to clarify, they wanted to make sure if I want to run monitor mode for an entire show, I have to dedicate an antenna for it. And the answer is
let's make sure that our naming is correct. So we have our scanner mode is for the antennas. And if it's in scanner mode, it cannot connect to belt packs when it's in scanner mode. So right now, this is in scanner mode. It cannot have belt packs connected. I disable that. I can now use it as a traditional antenna. Monitoring mode is for the belt packs. And that means I can put a belt pack in monitoring mode all day long, and I can still use the belt pack as needed. So to reiterate,
almost the same amount of information just with the monitor mode.
Yeah.
Depending on where the people are standing.
Yeah, I mean, let's look at it one more time. So we look at the scanner mode for the antenna. This is only going to view what this antenna sees. So whatever's in this antenna's range, this is the information I have, which is good information. It helps me know what sort of density I can put in this area. But with a belt pack now, I can hone in on a stage manager specifically. I can open up their monitor, and I can now see as they're walking around the venue what is happening to their transmission, receive errors, and their time slot usage while they're still operating on their belt packs.
Scroll up a little bit more. Do you not have the time slot usage in the belt pack monitor?
No, it's right here.
Oh, it's
it's right. Time slot usage is here, and then the time slot map is at the bottom.
Got it. So if you picked your 5 belt packs to be people that are usually spread around the venue, then you can get a pretty good look at what's happening.
Absolutely. Yeah, we have clients that, they're only using 5 belt packs, and they're like, well, is there any benefit to not having it run? And I was like, you could run it all day long for as much as I care, it will do its thing. And so they've decided to just, anytime the belt pack is on, it's in monitoring mode.
So the monitor mode and the scanner mode are the same license.
Correct.
Right.
Right. So for my brain, just to remind me, scanner mode ties up my antenna as long as it's running. Monitor mode is transparent to the user, so therefore the belt pack can keep operating as it has and it's a monitor. Scanner is a device, if you will, right? So I'm using that device.
Yeah, that was perfect explanation.
We have a very insistent question that's popped up 3 times now, which I didn't understand, but let's see if we can answer it now.
Okay.
Any chance of getting this question answered? Question mark, question mark, question mark. Are the antennas going to be red and blue at one point, meaning network redundancy per ST2110?
Unfortunately, I don't have any information on that. Yeah, I just don't have any information on that to share.
I don't know what that means. What does that question mean? What's red and blue?
So red and blue network meaning network redundancy. So if there were two AES 67 ports on an antenna, one would go to one network, your primary, and then the other would go to your secondary network to create a full 2110 or 2022-7 network redundant solution.
Which there aren't. There's only one antenna connection.
Right. So it'd be a whole new form of the hardware, because the other 2 ports are link ports for standalone link mode and are not network ports. So yeah, it'd be a totally new piece of hardware. I can't even speculate if that's even going to be a thing. So I would say no.
Here's an operational question. With the standalone system, can you add an ISO channel / conference for belt pack to belt pack only without using one of the NSA 4-wire ports?
Oh yeah, that's absolutely easy. So you go to the belt pack that you want to. Unfortunately, I'm not in standalone mode, so I can't show it off here. But you go to the belt pack you want to add. You can create a conference for. You can create a talk to another party line or another port or belt pack, if you will, since it's not a port in standalone mode.
Assuming you have
and then you just don't.
Assuming
you have enough conferences, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, if you
lots
want
of
to
people
do
that will
a
eat those
point,
up real fast.
I have run out of conferences and just done 3- and 4-way point-to-points, making sure that people know that when they're talking, they won't hear the whole conversation.
Yeah, that's very, very simple and easy to do.
Here was one. Can you reiterate the process of measuring the 15 dB separation of Bolero net spaces? Just to encapsulate the best, what's kind of the best procedure there?
Best procedure there is to turn a belt pack on, put it into walk test pro mode, because you're going to see in walk test pro all of the antennas that belt pack is connected to, or that belt pack can see, and then you'll be able to see receive and transmission errors, and you'll be able to start walking and you'll see the dBm level change. Once you comfortably get to a point where that is, you say, oh, this has been a 15 dBm drop, that's where you would place your second antenna or third antenna or fourth, fifth, etc.
And the Walk Test Pro you're talking about is built into the system all the time for everybody. You just have to
Correct.
set your menu to have full access. You won't see it unless it has advanced access. So it's not an additional app.
Yep. So to get to that, they have to have permissions to access the deep menu. So you click and hold the menu button. You'll see it change to quick menu. You continue to hold it. It'll change to its main menu. You scroll down to service, and then it's Walk Test Pro.
Do you think the monitor mode on a belt pack uses any extra power? Will they only get 17 hours of life instead of 18?
I don't know the specifics to that question. Obviously, the reasonable answer is it is probably using a little bit more power because you're using extra features. I don't think it is a devastating enough amount of power to that we would publicize that, oh, if you have monitoring mode on, you're only going to get half the battery out of it. I mean, it's probably minuscule. I would say you're still going to get, if we advertise 17 hours, you're probably going to get 16 and a half to 17 hours still out of it.
I find that if a stage manager is the belt pack and they're talking all the time, you don't get anywhere near close to 18 hours. You got to give them a new battery before showtime. But if somebody's just walking around never talking, they get really good time. Now, in walk test mode, it only is showing you on your belt pack in the antennas that you're registered to. Doesn't show anybody else's antennas.
Correct.
So it's only going to show the antennas that are on your network, and that belt pack can see So you won't see the antennas that are on the other side of the venue, only that belt pack can actually receive.
Correct. So if you have, if you have 5 antennas in your system and you turn Walk Test Pro on and it sees 3, that means 2 of them are out of range of that bell pack at that given time.
Right.
Yeah, if you want to see third-party data, you have to have the advanced RF monitor scanner and you have to be looking at the scanner on the antenna.
Now, is there any way, let's say I'm on a show, which I happen to be next week, where I don't have the monitor license? Is there any way, what would I do to, and I know there are going to be other 1.9 systems there. It's just a matter of doing a walk test and listening to the quality of my received audio to see if it's going to work well, right?
Yeah, I think that's going to be part of it. Referencing a slide in the PowerPoint, I mentioned that 15 dBm greater than where you're okay to reuse frequency is about 120 feet, 120 to 150 feet ish. So line of sight, obviously. So you want to take that in consideration if you don't have any monitoring tools. Let's say you're going into a venue fresh, you're going to have ClearComm, you're going to have Riedel. Now how do I combat this? Now you want to make sure that there is enough separation from those systems to make sure that there's going to be that play nice.
Now, if I bought an antenna with the monitor mode on it and did not connect it to any system, I could still watch all the other systems in the RF space on that bell pack. So
yeah. So what you're going to see,
$10,000, I could have a scanner.
Yeah, roughly. So you would just bring an antenna in, and there's a couple people that have talked about it, saying that, oh, I'm just going to buy my own antenna with my own RF app on it and just bring it in.
The big thing there, Jason Glass, is no, not economical.
Yeah. So you're gonna be able to you'll be able to see the different systems on air and the additional capacity and all of that. The big thing there is you're gonna see in this time slot map is you'll just see a lot of interfered or blocked frequencies. You're not gonna see on a per basis what those are.
You won't see who a particular person's belt pack.
Correct. So if you're operating outside of it, you're gonna just see a lot of either
by system. So
right, but you could easily, once you're in, you could bring it onto the network, right? Obviously, or you'll choose to just, be in that outside, viewing.
Is there any?
So what I've done in that situation, I've been asked to come into a couple venues with people that are using Bolero, and they're just like, I'm just really interested to see what's going on in here. So I bring in the RF scanner, and what I do is I add my antenna to their net and activate the scanner app. And then I use the license to activate one of their antennas as a scanner to see what's happening in that region, get a few scans, turn it off so that bell packs can connect to it. Obviously doing this before production's happening, but I get an idea of what's happening in their whole space, and then I can disconnect from that and then run the scanner on its own and see what else will just be happening generically as the production goes on.
Is there any other DECT time slot monitoring software by anybody else available on the market?
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah. I've seen software that allows you to see the time slots, but it doesn't do things like tell you what system it's on, that sort of thing.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, here's an interesting feature set request. Are there any plans to expand the scanner ability to generate a 2D map of a venue? That's kind of cool. Just, the kind of like thinking AirTag, right? And, where I could see this path.
Oh my God. Yeah. Chalk that up to the ultimate wish list item for sure.
Of course.
That would be so cool. If I could just say, all right, grab your Bolero, walk the venue, and now I have a full readout map of what, yeah, oh my God. That'd be
if
cool.
I laid that over in my Vectorworks drawing, plus I could see who's actually not using their wireless pack and go, here's your wired pack, because I see on your map you never left. So
you never moved. You moved a total of 3 feet.
And if they underutilize it, you can take it away from them.
See,
Yeah, chalk that up to that. That would be the ultimate wish list right there.
Now,
I'd love that.
the monitor license is available on non-standalone as well, right? You can use it on
Yep.
an integrated system.
Yeah, this system right here, we're using it on as an example. This is an integrated system. It does not have to be on a standalone. You do not need a standalone to add the monitor app. You can just add the monitor app with integrated. You can add standalone and integrated and monitor on top of each other. So,
Man, it's a very cool feature, and obviously we'll all be expecting it on every band split then. And you know, so many cool.
A question comes up all the time, every time we do a Bolero or 1.9 intercom show. Will there be an offline Bolero?
Yeah, we had to save that for the end.
honestly, I don't know if that will ever exist. It would be nice to at least get like your pre-configurations done. You know, get all your naming done, get your party line associated, all of that good stuff. I think that would be very helpful to have. I don't have the answer to that. I can surely ask if that's ever on the roadmap. We're always developing new software features, so we'll see in the future. But as of right now, I don't think it's being evaluated.
When I was doing a show down in Rio, we had an early version of a piece of hardware, and we were going to get a replacement from the manufacturer for the latest version. And what they did was they put it on a computer at their shop. And while I was waiting for the FedEx guy to come and pick up the equipment, I programmed the base station over their computer, which saved me, 30, 40 minutes when the thing arrived on site. I just had to sync the packs. Now, some vendors may do that. They could put put an antenna on a local computer, and you could then program your offline system right there and save it.
Yeah.
Now, when you save a configuration of the offline system, can it be loaded back onto a different standalone license?
Yeah. So if let's just take this let's pretend that I'm in a standalone configuration right here. If I click this save net config,
right,
I can take this on these 3 antennas that are a specific standalone, and I can go into a whole new system that's three new antennas and upload that net configuration. You'll have to resync all the belt packs, but you can at least, and that was the next point I was going to make. When I'm making if I'm going to make if I'm going to make a standalone file, before I sync any of my belt packs, go through, make all of my NSA configurations, name all of my party lines, make sure all those 4 wires are routed to the associate party lines that they need to be, make all my profiles, then save my net configuration, then sync my belt packs. And if I go to a new location, new antennas, new belt packs, new hardware, I can upload that net configuration. All of that naming will take, and I just upload my belt packs and I'm done.
How does it distribute the naming to the NSAs? If you have 3 or 4 NSAs in your programming, and then you go to another site and have 3 or 4 NSAs that are plugged in.
You still have to at that point you're gonna have to unassign the hardware and reassign the hardware to the NSAs that you'd want it to be.
Right. Yep. So they end up in the right hole, right?
Yep. You end up with the right configuration.
One last question here. It looks like, can you save scans, which we talked about, that's a feature TBD. But if they wanted to have you, Riedel, help them evaluate a problem, what would be like a scenario? Is that basically logging in like a team viewer and then connecting to the antenna that has that 3 days of data? Screenshots, because obviously the live information probably is a bit more helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's useful ways to log in and look through. I mean, if we did a team viewer session, we shared the screen and we looked through what was going on. I think it gives you part of the story is what's going on, particularly when you're looking at the belt pack monitoring, because if you called me up and say, hey, I had an issue with a belt pack in this particular location, I don't necessarily know the environment of what that is because I'm not in it with you, right? So I can only speculate as to what those problems are. Now, what I can do is I can look at the scanner application and I can see what's happening from the antenna level and see what sort of high or low interference is happening. Because, for example, let's go back into the radio scanner on the antenna. I'm going to stop the scan. Just because I've stopped the scan, you'll see now that it's stop scan. I see my 3 dotted lines. I can still scroll back in this window and I can still adjust my RSSI thresholds and apply those. So I can still see what's going on at that particular moment in time. Maybe there was a noise floor problem I can investigate. I can see what's going on. Maybe in the instance of an LTE signal coming in, which show this entire frequency band is blocked, then I can go, hey, I look at my RSSI threshold and it's, let's say it's at 59 and I hit apply and this whole thing is just black. I'll be like, wow, that's really powerful. What's going on there? And I can speculate and I can say, oh, it's probably a cell signals coming in. We need to contact the local cell company and figure out they need to turn their stuff off or turn it down or recalculate it or recalibrate it.
But this particular screen is not exportable, right?
Correct, it's not exportable.
Other than a picture of the screen.
Yep. So you'd have to take screenshots. We'd have to do screen share, all that good stuff.
Well, we're never satisfied, Matthew.
Exactly.
Always one more feature. Yeah.
I will say that the saving of the scan is definitely one of the things that I would have liked to have seen in the initial release. I can 100% say I wish they would have done that. I wish they would have made that part of the initial feature because I think having that initial scan is very, very important. And having that ability to save data is huge. I mean, it's invaluable. So I'm with all of you on that. Don't make me the bad guy.
No, we are. That's all good. And just so everybody knows, we're not blaming the cell providers. We are co-operating, co-located. It's not necessarily the cell operator's fault. I just want everything. If only they knew. But
is there a list? Is there a list on the Riedel site about what countries and what kind of frequencies they use in their 1.9 bands in different countries around the world?
I don't think there's a list on Riedel's website, but if you can just simply Google DECT and look at the global bands. I think the Wikipedia page outlines all of that. I do think we have something. That we can share, but I would have to track it down. That does outline every region and what's allowed in DECT and what their frequency bands are and their peak milliwatt transmission is and all that good stuff. But I definitely would have to look.
And Kelly put in a link to the network show we did, which is where we could find more technical details on how to implement a boundary clock. I think in that network show there was.
Yes, Stephen talks through all of that and in a lot of detail. And like I said, I think more and more we're just going to see the implementation of leader clocks across so many applications. I even bought a Dante bridge because I got tired of fighting over bringing Dante in from here, there, or everywhere and trying to, it's like, here, fine, plug in over here. Takes me back to the old TW12 days, Pete, and System A and System B, and off we go. They weigh about the same too. They just cost disproportionately different amounts of money. and Pete, maybe we can put this up on our website. Henry posted the various regions of region 1 in Europe, 1880 to 1900, Americas 1920 to 1930, and Asia and the oceans 1880 to 1900. So
But again,
thank you.
that's pretty easy to look on a Google.
Exactly.
Google is your friend.
Yeah, and keep in touch with Dave and Matthew. We've, again, their contact info is at the top of the show. You've got all your handouts there. Really enjoyed today's session. Thanks for coming in and talking with us about it, because we're only adding channels and users. So
And Dave and Matthew's email addresses are on the screen right now. If you make note of those, and you can bother, they stay up all night to answer questions.
yeah, absolutely. And again, thank you everyone for okay, I'll ask this one last question. I promise you this will be the last one. The clock class of UIC 128's the newest, because you referenced the cards for like the artist frame versus the newer systems. Still a similar clock class due to what they're connected to, or because we didn't really get into using Bolero on a 1024. And
Yeah. No one's actually come out and said this. It's all been theorized by product management and the system consulting team that technically it should have a better clock class than a Bolero antenna, therefore should be able to clock more devices. But no one has yet to actually test this or verify this. So it's something that we continually need to investigate on a Riedel level. But I would assume that it is a better clock. So if anyone wants to be a guinea pig and try it out, let me know what
there you go.
Let me know what your findings are.
So there you go. It's a definite maybe. So I think that's a great way to wrap up our day. Again, thank you everyone. Thank you Matthew. Thank you Dave. And everybody, it's so great to see that our industry has picked back up. And I know everybody's really busy, so we appreciate you making time to log in and be a part of these as attendees, because that's important to the manufacturers to know that the marketplace is out there, and we love working with manufacturers who like to listen. So thank you very much for that. Any last words, Mac, Pete?
I'm speechless.
He's speechless. Yeah. All right.
Yeah, but mind blown.
It took us 89 episodes, but we did it. And we have a speechless moment for Pete. So on that note, everybody have a good one, and keep working out there, and we'll be looking forward to you joining us next time we have a Practical Show Tech episode. So long.
Talk to y'all later. Bye.